Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content, and before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, and so we are getting closer and closer. We are less than 20 games away for most teams until we get to the NBA playoffs. And we've had, we're in this stretch now where you got a lot of games and a lot of different matchups going on, right? Where a lot of these teams are trying to make, a push to try to get into, the playoffs or to get their preferred seeding or whatever. One of the teams that we're talking about is the Minnesota Timberwolves, right? Where now they have won 7 in a row, 8 of their last 10. And they had a stretch obviously earlier in the season where they weren't playing very well, right? Where a lot of guys were really struggling and just couldn't figure out ways to, really contribute, right? Like McDaniels was struggling. Naz Reid was kind of having a rough stretch at the beginning of the season. Mike Conley was bad. But a lot of that's changed now where everybody by and large is playing well. They've kind of figured out a couple of young guys to add into the rotation, at least for these regular season games like Jalen Clark. Terrence Shannon Jr., he had a stretch where he was playing. We liked him in the draft, right, as a potential contributor for certain games. But now they've found their stride. They had a big win that we talked about over the Nuggets, right, in the last episode. And they're trying to close in on that playoff spot. I don't know if they'll get it, right? Because obviously they're chasing Golden State. But, again, it's good to see them at a point now where they're legitimately playing the best basketball that they're playing this season. A lot of it, like I said, to be fair, is against not great teams, but it doesn't matter, right? Because they lost a lot of these type of games earlier in the season, which was why they were in the hole they were in. Now they're consistently winning those games. And now you wonder, is it possible that if they get in a first round matchup, could they pull off an upset? And given the way that they've looked against some of the top seeds, they could do it, because obviously the playoff standings, they change every day. Right, a week ago, Lakers were 2, right? Grizzlies were like 4 or 5, right? But now, as we're recording, of course things could change, but now the Rockets are the 2 seed. The Nuggets, right, are the 3 seed, but we've seen this season where the Wolves have by and large dominated the Nuggets matchup, right? I think the Rockets series is split, although you got some kind of funky games that happened earlier in the season, and then a couple of games I think where guys were shorthanded. But if you're the Wolves, and they've also played very well against OKC, so they've played relatively strong basketball against a lot of the higher seeds. But obviously, the playoffs are different. We know that they have some guys like Julius Randle, right, where he's a guy where come playoff time, he tends to play worse, right? He tends to play worse than the numbers, and he's put up really good numbers as of late, right? He's distributing the ball really well, taking advantage of the offense when it's there, but also not really doing too much, right? Where it feels like he's kind of just monopolizing the offense and just, getting some really nasty possessions. He's fitting in pretty well, and he has to, right? Because, again, he's got one more year, a player option on his deal, right? And there's not really a lot of teams with cap space. So I think the ideal scenario, if you're Julius Randle, is you either opt in and then, or, sign an extension or whatever, right? And that you would have to play your best basketball. And he's doing that. Of course, we'll see what it looks like come playoff time, but everybody's playing well too, because we mentioned Jaden McDaniels, pretty much consistently double figures guy. Naz Reid doing it off the bench. Gobert, now he's back and healthy. So they're looking really good now. And I do think, again, you don't pick them to win a series, but they look a lot closer to the rest of the pack now than they did earlier in the season, right? Because if you look at the standings, again, they're the 7th seed, only 4 more losses than Houston, the 2 seed.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I think you love everything that you're seeing from Minnesota. I think basketball wise, they're clicking on all gears. Everything's working. Like we talked about in the short. Julius Randle has really learned how to play off the ball. He's getting Gobert involved. He's passing. And Edwards, I think that's another key part of it. Like he'd been playing well all year, but I think he was having trouble kind of deciphering and trying to engage with the double team, especially when a third defender got involved. But I think now he's learned, or continuing to show the growth in learning how to break down that that double team and, find a way to either dish the rock when the third guy gets involved or break down the double team, and simply just shoot over guys because he's that good. But collectively as a unit, yeah, everything seems to be rolling. Key minutes guys or key rotational guys are starting to emerge, and that's a good sign because I think the more deep that you are, the better poised you are for a playoff run. And I think this is more close to what we thought that they were going to look like going into the season. Obviously, chemistry and, getting these things rolling takes some time. But, I think there was a world in theory where, yeah, Julius Randle really could be a force down low. And I think, if you're paint mashing with those two guys, Gobert and Randle, considering Randle knows how to pass the ball, I think it's a good sign, and I think in theory it worked. We just didn't really get to see it up until now. Everybody's mainly healthy. McDaniels being a solid guy, offensively helps because we saw that in the playoffs. If he can really just spot up in the corner and be a transition option, I think, that's more than enough to fit in. And that's really the bare minimum. So, overall, I think offensively we know what they're capable of and defensively as well. I think Randall's fit in pretty well defensively too. So, everything seems to be clicking, on all fronts, and that's kind of the Minnesota that I think we were expecting. So it's pretty good.
And you're right. That's a good point where, with the Wolves, right, last year they were the best defensive team in the NBA, right? Like this season, they haven't been quite as good, but they are sixth, right? And that's a big deal, right? Because, they're still pretty close to a top 5 defense, right? And if you talk about, the last 10-ish games or so, right, again, defensively, they're 8, right? So they've been a little bit worse than they have been on the season as a whole, but they're 6th in offensive rating, right? So that's kind of what you want to see, where you want to see that offense be improved, right? While the defense is still really, really good. And that's where you have the potential where, like I said, if they can get a good matchup, right? I think they have a real chance to maybe pull off an upset in one of these series. You wouldn't pick them, but there's at least a possibility there, right? Like, again, I think they could pull off an upset against Houston. Denver, maybe. I mean, again, they played them great in the regular season, so playoff basketball could be different. But, with the way that Denver has played as of late, right, it feels, a little bit, it feels like they're a lot more likely to be had. I'm not saying they will be, but, when you've watched them in some of their recent games, it's been pretty weird, right? Because they're 5-5 in their last 10. They did get, a win over the Lakers, right? It was a shorthanded Lakers, but it was a game where they were in real danger losing that game. You call it now, obviously it's a win, right? But then the real one that's a killer, right, is the next one. It was the second night of a back-to-back. No Aaron Gordon, but it's the Wizards, right? And then they find a way to lose to the Washington Wizards, and I think they are one of the only teams to lose the season series matchup to the Wizards because they lost, I'm pretty sure, the Wizards game earlier in the season, right? Because that was the one where Jokic had almost 60.
Yes,
and they found
did.
a way to win.
Yeah.
And a lot of Denver's losses, right, are these games where, maybe you don't get much help offensively out of, guys outside of Jokic. Now, Jamal Murray was good, or they just can't stop anybody, right? And that's been like a key consistent thing with Denver. And it feels like the defense is getting worse because, like even – because like during that stretch where they were winning, where they won 9 straight or whatever, mostly against bad teams, like the defense wasn't great. But like the last few games, like they've been giving up points left and right? Where again, I mean, like 126 to the Washington Wizards, right? Who again, not a great team. They look, more professional, I guess, but still not a great team. They gave up, what was it, 120 whatever to LA, but like a very shorthanded LA team, right? That probably shouldn't really happen. Of course, you can always call it a trap game, right? Because, again, shorthanded team, you're probably not taking them seriously, right? But then, like, 127 OKC, 141 to Phoenix, even in some of these wins, like, they give up a lot of points. And I just think that's going to have to get better in order for them to be able to make a better run. Now, I know the year they won the title, their defense in the regular season was not amazing, but part of it was that second half of the season, right, where they kind of just took it off. Then in the playoffs, it looked a lot better, right? But it just, again, we've talked about it, where losing guys like KCP and Bruce Brown, it really hurts them on the defensive end because they just don't have anybody else that can really make up for that, right? To the point where, you watch them play and you just kind of wonder, forget the regular season, come playoff time, how are they going to slow down some of these other mainly guards, right? Or, guards and wings, right? Like, how are they going to slow down a guy like, Ant-Man when they couldn't even really do it last year by and large, right?
Yeah.
Now it feels like they're worse defensively than last year, right? And then, how are they going to, let's say they play Steph, right, in the second round or
Mhm.
even the first round, right?
Mhm.
Like, are they going to be able to slow him down? Maybe, but, probably not. Especially with the way they've been playing. So I don't know. I mean, what do you think of this Nuggets team? Because I do feel like, because we've talked about OKC where it feels like, there's starting to become a narrative that maybe they might be a fraudulent team, right? Despite how well they've played. And again, who knows? Maybe they do lose in the second round, but they are 9-1 in their last 10. They've had some really strong games against a lot of, quality opponents. And then even, in the games where they're not playing great teams, they still win by and large. So, what am I missing here? I mean, we've talked about it, but, Denver, I think by and large is viewed as the second best, is still, I think, viewed as the second best team in the Western Conference. But I do think because of the playoff pedigree, that's where people trust them more. But I just don't know if they're going to be able to pull it off this time, mainly just like I said, because of the defense. But maybe you see it differently.
No, I completely agree. They don't have any defensive wing depth at all, and I think that's what made them very strong. During their championship run. And like take the Wizards game for example. And this is another thing. I think the wing depth that they had during the title year definitely masked a lot of problems that Jokic has defensively. Like in this Wizards game, Alex Sarr dropped 34 points, FYI, and he was
Shout out to him, by the way. He's been playing
yeah.
really, really good basketball where, he's making my, mock draft thing look a lot better than it did. Risa Shea's still been really good,
Sure,
obviously, but
sure.
like he
Yeah.
was, people were calling him a bust,
Oh, I know.
after summer league showings,
I
but we'll
know.
see.
Yeah, but like
hmm
he dropped 34 points, in 32 minutes, and I think that's something to keep an eye on because we already know that Jokic isn't one of the best defenders, so that's already kind of a non-starter. Then you don't have the wing depth that you had during your title run, and you've kind of replaced that with Christian Brown, who's actually a very good player on both ends of the floor, but I think he's a
Right.
way less versatile than the guys that were on that title team, even though he was as well. But like KCP, Bruce Brown, and not having Aaron Gordon in this game definitely hurt
Yeah.
as well, and that's going to hurt
They
probably
needed
every night because you need him on
Yeah.
both ends of the floor for sure. But overall, like if they go up against a legitimate contender, which we've already seen, and some teams that aren't contenders, they cannot stop them because they just don't have the wings, to slow down guys and really be pesky.
Good
And
guards.
exactly, and that's exactly what I was about to say. They don't have the guards as well. You like Westbrook and what his effort, what kind of effort level that he does bring defensively, but sometimes the tools aren't always there. Like, yeah, he'll get a nice good block or a stop or something like that, but it's too inconsistent. You know what I mean? And Jamal Murray's not an elite defender by any means, so. They just don't have a ton of stoppers, and I think that's the problem, especially considering that Jokic is, 100% more of an offensive-minded center, and I just think that's a non-starter. You want to kind of have those defensive guys and guys who really know their role, and I just don't think they have those people present on the roster, and that's why they've been dropping certain games.
And the wild thing is that statistically, by and large, when Jokic isn't out there, they're even worse on defense, right? And I think part of the problem there is like obviously they're going to probably struggle to score, right? So then that means other teams are going to be able to get out and run, but also they can't really rebound either, right? Even though they have a relatively big team, right? Like you said, Aaron Gordon's one of those key pieces because when he's not there, they're going to look worse on both ends of the floor, but especially on defense because, like I said, they can't really rebound.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't really have a big, because during the title year, he was the guy that tended to guard a lot of the big wings and forwards, right? Like, they put him on, he had the quote where he mentioned, like, I got to guard, what was it, Towns, LeBron, who was this, Durant, and then Jimmy Butler, all in like one playoff run, right? Like, that's the guy that they're going to use to guard the big wings, and forwards and whatnot. But, you don't have anybody that could really be a POA guy against the other guards. That was KCP, right? Or at the very least for him, he could be like a chaser defensively, right? He's a guy that could kind of chase guys around screens and things like that and make it at least tough for certain types
he's
of
got the length to make any shot difficult.
Right, and you just don't have that at all. So so the depth in the defense to me is where I'm kind of concerned about them. Like, just obviously in the playoffs they're not going to be playing as many guys. So in general, so everybody will probably play like 40 minutes or whatever, but I don't know. It I, again, they could still pull it off for sure, but this is probably like the lowest that I would feel about them at this point, which is funny, right? It's just kind of wild how fast the NBA changes, right?
Mhm.
Because 2 seasons ago, when they were coming off the title, we were all looking at them like as a potential next dynasty, right? Like we were looking at them as like they're the clear cut favorites pretty much every year. And then that pretty much lasted 1 year because they just haven't been able to really make up for the players that they lost. It feels like if they do lose this summer, they're probably gonna end up probably not completely breaking up the core, but I feel like they could easily move off of maybe like Michael Porter Jr.
Oh, for sure.
or someone like that. And it's not even that like he's a terrible player or anything. It's just there's no real way to realistically upgrade the roster without doing something like that. Because we
Yep.
know they tried to do that earlier in the season, right? It was reported as such, right?
Yep.
That they were looking at guys like Zach Levine, what was it, Jordan Poole, even some other bench guys like Clarkson. Maybe they tried to do that. I don't know, but they didn't have the contracts to really trade. And then, of course, it didn't help that they signed Dario Saric, and he doesn't
Oh
even
boy.
play.
Oh boy.
Yeah, like that, and that's kind of one of the flaws or the bad decisions that they made, right? Because what did they do? If I'm not mistaken, what did they do? They dropped or not dropped. They traded Reggie Jackson. They just dumped him,
Hmm.
and it's not like he's really good anymore. But
Hmm.
it's just he was a contract. He was a player that you could at least maybe potentially use in a trade.
Yeah, flip.
But yeah, or flip, right? And they didn't have that. The only other player is Zeke Naji, and
Oh boy.
nobody wanted his contract. Now, in fairness, he's been playing and he's been playing fine, right? It's just, I think you would have rather something else. But, we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see where things end up, but I don't know, it's tough. It's really tough for them. But they're still going to be able to win games. But we'll see cuz, it all comes down to for a lot of these teams health, possibly strength of schedule because you look at the Houston Rockets, it was looking pretty rough, right? Where, they were losing a lot of games, but now they're getting healthier, even though they don't have Amen Thompson back, but most of their other guys are back, right? Like Van Vliet's back. That's huge because
Hmm.
helps run their offense. Now they're 7-3 in their last 10. They've won 6 in a row, and now they've moved up to the 2 seed. Of course, it could change, right? Because seeds 2 through 5, which includes the Lakers, all have the same amount of losses. Now, the Rockets, Nuggets, and the Grizzlies have the same record because the Lakers have played fewer games.
Hmm.
But you know, any one of those seeds could move from 2 to 4, 2 to 5, 3 to 5, 5 to 4, 5 to 2, in the span of like a week or so. But, with the Rockets, it is funny, right? Just because, their schedule is amongst one of the easier ones, right? The rest of the way. So, and we know by and large that they can probably win a lot of those games because of their defense. And now some of their other guys are back and healthy and playing better. So again, I still wouldn't really take them as seriously as a playoff threat, but as a regular season team, they might be able to kind of make it a nightmare for some of these other teams who are trying to catch up. Like say a team like Golden State, who's 9-1 in their last 10, winners of 7 in a row, and they haven't moved since they've climbed up to the 6th seed because everybody around them, aside from, I guess LA, right, has been winning,
Yeah.
right? By and large, right? And then, like some of the other teams, they don't have the tiebreaker against the Lakers,
Hmm.
so they'd have to jump over them entirely. Then you got the Wolves on their tail. So, what do you think of all this, right?
Yeah.
Like in terms of like all of these seeds and all these teams moving around, what are your thoughts on
I
this?
mean, it's a hodgepodge. It's a huge, mess. Nightly, any and every game pretty much matters for
Hmm.
seeds 2 through 6, in my opinion, and that's the crazy part. And even I would even throw Minnesota in there because, like you said, they're right on the tail of the Warriors, and I think you know What does it look like by the end? Who knows? Because it could look very, very different from this. But, like you said, with Houston being on the win streak, I think they're the ones who are kind of, capping the ceiling of all these teams, jumping everybody because, like you said, the strength of schedule. But the momentum is on their side as well. And, there are some teams that I think have some 50-50 problems, like Denver, even Memphis as well, like the inconsistent play here and there.
Yeah.
I know they are 5-5 in their last 10 on a 1-game win streak, but, that could very well, flip flop next week or something like that. The Lakers, I think they reported that Braun had his first on court workout or whatever, so that's at least
At least,
another week or two. So
yeah, at least another week. But Hayes is back,
yeah,
and
that's a good
then
thing.
I think Rui's supposed to maybe be back within a week. We don't know, of course.
Yeah.
You never know about that. 'Cause
Yep.
that's the thing. Is like for a team like that, they were the 2 seed a week ago,
Mhm.
and then after a string of injuries and bad losses, right now they're down to 5, and they may end up staying there. If they can't get those guys back, because we were looking at that tough stretch for them as if they could go 500 and then the rest of the way do good, then they'd probably be fine, and maybe they're 2-3. But now they're 5, and if they continue to lose some games, they may be in the play-in. But if their reinforcements come back, then they'll probably be fine. And for a lot of these teams, the seeding doesn't necessarily matter as much. It depends on the health and also the matchup, because we know in the Western Conference particularly, it's the matchups that are more important, because outside of OKC, a lot of these other teams just look at the loss column or like right there with one another,
Yep.
right? So I mean, like if you're and we can kind of maybe look at some of these teams and maybe look at some of the matchups because we talked about Minnesota. But say, if you're, I don't know, say if you're a team like Denver, who would you want to play, or who would you probably, maybe outside of Minnesota, is there another team that maybe you might want to avoid? Not because you would 100% lose, but it may be a tougher matchup than you think.
Oh, the Warriors 100%, because
Okay.
they don't have the defensive personnel to check a lot of those guys, like who's really going to realistically slow down, Curry? I can't really think of anybody. I think Aaron Gordon could handle Jimmy, but collectively as a unit, I think the Warriors would probably give them a run for their money. But outside of that, I think Denver would be okay with playing like LA, Memphis even. So I think the Warriors would be the one that I would be scared of,
My
and
only
Minnesota.
my only concern with Denver against a team like maybe like I think they could handle Memphis fine. My
Yep.
only concern about them for a team like LA is the perimeter offense from their 3 guys. There could, what if a scenario where like who's the guarding Luca, right?
Sure.
I'm assuming you're going to put Gordon back on LeBron,
Mm-hmm.
but then that leaves Austin. He's been able to get going against Denver. That would be my concern if
Mm-hmm.
you're Denver. But is it a winnable matchup? It could be. Like, it's not that they are gonna lose to these matchups, but which matchups do you prefer if you're Denver, right? Or say if you're Memphis, right? Which teams would you rather play, right? Like, the Warriors, it seems like that's a matchup that's been very tough for them,
Yeah.
right? Like where whereas like maybe it seems like this season they've gotten owned by Houston, but it's a regular season matchup. So I don't necessarily know what that would entail come playoff time. But I think ideally, whatever team you are, I think probably the worst case scenario is 4-5. Because if you're in 4-5, that means that you're playing OKC in the second round.
Yep.
And I just don't really want to do that. Because
Yep.
given their record, given how good they've been, I know a lot of people look at them as a team to be had, and maybe they are, but that's not the team I would want to play in the second round, right? Like I'd rather 2-3 spot, I think, is the most ideal. Because especially if you're 2, because if you're the 2 seed, you're playing whoever's in the play-in, which might be a better matchup than any of the teams outside of the play-in.
Mm-hmm.
Then you get to avoid OKC until the conference finals and let them tough it out against whoever the 4-5 matchup is.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
But some of these teams may prefer to play OKC earlier, right? Just depending on, like if you're Golden State, you probably want to push to see if you can get 4-5, and maybe you might have a chance to play OKC in the second round and kind of see what it looks like,
Yeah.
Against them. But I think in general, I usually would prefer to avoid those type of teams as long as possible,
Mm-hmm.
right? And just kind of, maybe hope that they get knocked out by somebody else. So I think really for the playoffs in the Western Conference, if you can avoid playing OKC until the conference finals, that's probably the most ideal spot to be in. But of course, the main thing is just win. because you don't want to be in the play-in anyways. Because if you're in the play-in, you could lose, you could get knocked out, and even if you make it out of the play-in, you might play OKC anyways, and that would be game over in my opinion. Because I don't think any
Exactly.
of the lower seeds would take out OKC in the first round.
Yeah.
Like maybe Minnesota might have a shot, but I wouldn't bet on it.
No, I think OKC is a little bit too dominant. I think they're a lock for the Western Conference Finals. I mean,
Right.
I might be alone on that one, but I don't know. That's just how I feel.
Yeah, and with the lower seeds in the West, after 8, nobody really cares, right? Like nobody cares about the Kings,
No.
nobody cares about Dallas.
Yeah.
Maybe Phoenix might make
No.
a last second push to get in,
No.
but like
No.
there's 11th right now,
Yeah.
so
No.
we'll see. But like, at that point, it's really about 1 through 8, but
Mm-hmm.
obviously that could change. But I feel like pretty much the top 8, I feel like the 8 in the West are decided. It's just the order now,
Yep.
right? Cuz like Kings, Mavs, Suns, I think those teams are probably out cuz I don't trust any of those teams. Maybe Phoenix might be able to push past like Sacramento and Dallas, right? But they would still have to, I mean, they got to get into 10 first. But
Yeah. I don't believe
Dallas has
them.
been sliding. So if Phoenix could win some more games, it would help, but their schedule is very difficult. But I,
Yeah.
I feel like pretty much 1 through 8, that's your most likely, right? With maybe
100%.
Phoenix being a wild card, but the best they could pull off is 8, and that's instant death in the first round, anyways. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's,
Yeah.
um,
Getting out of the play-ins
yeah,
rough, bro.
yeah, in the East, it's a lot different than the Western Conference, right? Like obviously Cleveland, right before we hopped on, their 16-game winning streak was ended by the Orlando Magic,
Yep.
right? They have just really struggled, right? Obviously, no Jalen Suggs, but it's unfortunate, right? Like how bad their offense has been this season, just because you would feel like with Paolo and Franz, they'd be better, but it's awful. I mean, like really, they win games strictly because of their defense, right?
Yep.
Like, and for the Cavs, not a big deal because you lost, one game in the last 17, so not really the end there. Right, Boston, Porzingis finally came back, right? He got to play against Brooklyn, so that's good to see, and he looked fine in his comeback, right? So hopefully he continues to play well, and continue to stay healthy because he had, seems like a rough illness for a
Mm.
while. And then with the Knicks, right, big game against Golden State, right? I thought that was a pretty competitive game. Obviously, the Knicks lost, but it was nice to see Mitchell Robinson back. They played him with Karl Anthony Towns. And in some of the minutes that he played in, it looked solid. He just can't move right now. And that's kind of the issue for him, where you watch him out there, you can tell he's not really been able to do much conditioning, which is not his fault, right? He had a really long injury that dated back to last year's playoffs. But I think at least the hope would be he can come back and at least help them out on the boards, help them out defensively, make it so that way it's not just Karl Anthony Towns as your lone center in the main rotation. Because I just, you probably, in order to get stops in certain possessions, you don't want that. And they are playing some of their bench guys, even though they're not great. And again, it's a tough loss. But the big news for them is the Brunson thing, where it seemed like he was only going to be out for a couple of weeks. Now they're saying he may not be back until late March, maybe early April. I mean, again, I think for them, the main thing is they're probably not going to lose the 3 seed. Maybe they do, but I mean, for them, they may have been able to kind of, with the amount of games that they're ahead of Milwaukee, right? They have 4 fewer losses than the Bucks. That's probably going to be able to buy them some time with him and just kind of get him healthy. But obviously, the main caveat here is if he misses too many games, right? I think he's going to be out of the All NBA discussion, right?
Yep.
Because 65 games, right, is the cutoff point, and he had only missed 2 games before his injury. But late March, early April, I mean, that would put him pretty dangerously close to the mark where he may be out of it, right? Math wise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's really unfortunate.
Right. But obviously, the main thing priority wise for them is get healthy, because they need him obviously desperately, right? That's their best
Heck yeah.
player. That's the guy that the offense is built on. But at the very least, at least going to give them some opportunities to maybe carve out some other lineups when Brunson isn't out there. Maybe some lineups where maybe they can find some ways to get some guys together who can give them some quality defense.
Yeah.
Because that's really the main thing that they need come playoff time. Because the offense, with Brunson out there and Towns should still be pretty good. But, the defense is obviously the big concern with them. And I feel like there's some room for improvement there with the return of Mitchell Robinson. Is it enough to be able to get them past, Boston and Cleveland? I don't know, but at the very least, if you can get some better defensive reps, then I think that will at least get you closer.
Yeah, the Knicks are in a tricky predicament because I think on paper,
Right.
when the team was first assembled, you kind of liked it, but you also kind of felt like, well, are they actually going to work? I think they've worked on some ends of the floor, but at times they look completely discombobulated, especially on the defensive end. And I think it stems from, Karl Anthony Towns not really being one of the better
Mhm.
defenders in the league.
Mhm.
So I think you do kind of need that two big lineup come postseason to kind of be perfected. And I hope that's going to be the case because, I think the wings are okay. But even then, like health wise, Anunoby wasn't really healthy the majority of the year. I mean, Josh Hart has been out there, giving it his all and stuff like that. But I don't know. I don't feel like they have the firepower at this point.
Mhm. Yeah, and again, it's a tough situation to be in, right? Because they put together this roster with the intent clearly of trying to have a chance at winning the title, but it's tough, because when you look at the Eastern Conference, it just seems like the Cavs and the Celtics are in another tier, right? Now, again, maybe that changes come playoff time, but I feel like the Eastern Conference feels a little bit more certain, where it just comes down to, right, are the Celtics going to be able to wake up and play like how they were able to play last year, or is it just that the Cavs might just be too good, right? Could there be a spoiler in there? Maybe the Bucks, they've been playing better recently. Maybe the Knicks can kind of figure out some defense, but after that, I feel like it's kind of a tough case to really make for any other team.
Agree.
Like the Pacers are 500 now in their last 10. They got, waxed by Milwaukee, and I don't know. I just, we'll see what they look like, but there's, for them, it really comes down to Halliburton and, some of the other bench guys, but I don't know. They haven't played as well recently, but Nemhard, I think, is the other part that's kind of a disappointment, right? Because last year, when Halliburton was out, and particularly in the postseason, right, he looked like, you know, potential star,
Hmm.
right? But it feels like he just hasn't been that guy this season. And, it feels a lot like Halliburton or bust in a lot of these games. I mean, outside of Siakam, who's been really good, but it just feels like they need a little bit more. But it's hard for me to take them seriously as like a true contender in the Eastern Conference, but I could be wrong because, prior to that, they did have a long stretch where they were playing better, and they're still a quality team. I don't know if they're going to be able to take out those other teams, but they've played them well, though. They have played the Celtics and the Cavs well. So maybe matchup wise, but I think playoff time, it's going to be really tough. I feel like it's pretty much those two teams. I mean, the Bucks, yeah, they got the depth at the deadline with Porter Jr. and Jericho Sims. So, and then obviously you got in Kuzma. So maybe, but I don't know. Do you think it's just Cavs and Celtics, or do you at least give the other teams a shot?
I mean, I throw the Knicks in there because of
Okay,
Brunson and Towns. I think
that's
you
fair.
you can't discredit what they've been able to do throughout the majority of the season offensively. It's just I think defensively is where we're going to see them, probably have their woes in the playoffs. But
Mhm.
that being said, I think, because there's so many variables with the playoffs. Like we're
Yeah,
talking kind of like, everything's set in stone, everybody's healthy. What if
right,
somebody has a crazy injury or something like that?
for
Hopefully
sure.
nothing happens like that. But, say, the Knicks are going up against a hobbled Boston or a hobbled Cleveland, then I could for sure see them being, one of those spoilers, kind of like how Indiana was last year, and kind of just ruin and wreck everything. But,
Right.
we'll have to see. But I think they're probably the most prone to beat either Boston or Cleveland
Mhm.
if it comes to it. I think you do have to consider Milwaukee for that as well because of the Giannis factor, but that's the only thing that's kind of like keeping that team afloat. Like you said, their acquisitions and Dame have played, better this season, but I think, Giannis is kind of the glue of that team and obviously the core of it. So, he's going to go off, but is it going to be enough, considering that you do
Right.
have to go up against Boston or Cleveland? I highly
Mhm.
doubt it. I just think they're on a whole nother level.
Yeah. And that's really the question there, And again, the Cavs, I think some people feel similar-ish questions
Mm-hmm.
with them
Mm-hmm.
to a team like Oklahoma
Mm-hmm.
City, right? Where it's two teams that have been very dominant in the regular season, but do we trust them come playoff time to actually be able to, live up to what we've seen from them in the regular season. Because, if they do, then you'd almost feel like that this would be the finals matchup. But I feel like there's still, at least like you said, you do have to factor in other things that you don't always expect, like injuries and things like that. But fully, I guess the question is, because like I think with Cleveland, they pretty much have a bye, I think, to the conference finals, right?
Hmm.
Unless assuming that, because they're not going to lose to any of the first round matchups, right? And then in the second round, it's either the Cavs or the Pacers. I just don't see them losing to either of those teams. But you just never know. I mean, like maybe somebody sells in the playoffs and then, it all comes crashing down. But I
But
think
through
matchup
7
wise,
games, I
yeah,
doubt it.
right.
Not with the momentum they have right now. But I
And
get what
home
you're saying.
court,
I get what you're
yeah, and
saying.
home, yeah. So I feel like the East is more set. The West one I think is a little bit tougher, but I do still feel like OKC should still be the favorite. I would be more surprised. I would be surprised if they lost before the conference finals, but that's just my opinion.
Agreed. I think they're going to be representing the West, and that's what we kind of said going into the season. And lo and
Yeah,
behold,
that was our pick.
hopefully
Yeah, that was
that
our pick.
comes to fruition.
Right. And, again, with the way they've continuously played, like they've not really had any bad stretches regardless of who's been out there. And that's where, they've been pretty consistent. It's just we've talked about OKC before where for them it comes down to, can the young guys, behind SGA break out in the playoffs? Because if they do, right, then they're going to get even closer to their ceiling where they may actually be able to pull it off and win the title. Because we've talked about some of these young teams where they've been able to kind of sometimes just when you least expect it, just break out and then boom, all of a sudden they're in the finals.
Heck yeah.
Maybe they win it all. Yeah, we've talked about that with some other teams like Golden State in the past, and others. So
Yeah.
I'm still high on OKC, right?
Heck yeah.
I'm you know what I mean? Like I don't really I think you got to take them seriously. I don't look at them as like I wouldn't dismiss them because you do that
Yeah.
and
Yeah. They
they,
feel like the Oklahoma City team with like Russ, Katie and Harden all over again. The year that they went to the finals. That's what it feels like to me.
right. I guess, maybe to conclude off of a lot of this matchup stuff, do you feel like if you're OKC, which of those teams are you the most afraid of? Would it be Denver just because it seems like they're probably the second best? Or is there another team outside of Denver that you might be a little bit scared of?
Um, I would say Denver because of the Jokic factor.
Hmm.
That's nothing to really scoff at. Like Jokic can take over a game, and we already know that he can make people better offensively. So, say you have a game where Jokic pops off and Jamal Murray does his thing. I could for sure see them losing, especially if Chet or J Dub doesn't show up. That's going to be the key. If it comes down to Shea versus Jokic, that's it. Then I'd probably take Denver. But
Right.
that's the thing because I mean the two big lineup could potentially play a big factor in the Denver matchup.
Right.
But we've also seen that get obliterated one night, and they also obliterated them the first night. So I don't
Right.
know. I think it's going to come down to the supporting cast of both teams. That's going to be the key. How well can all these teams play collectively? And I think OKC has some question marks, but the writing is
Mhm.
kind of on the wall where they're poised for a breakout. So, I mean, honestly, if you want me to keep it real, to answer your
Mhm.
question, I would say Denver, but at the same time, if I'm Oklahoma City, I'm going into this playoff run with no fear. I wouldn't fear anybody. You're number one seed for a reason. You lost 12 games on the season. You have, arguably the best player in the league right now in Shea. You have two young guys that are ready to break out, and it's time to shock the world or prove everybody wrong, whatever narrative you want to run with. But I really think they shouldn't be scared of anybody.
Yeah, like, and you make a great point, right? Where it could be like a chip on their shoulder type of run where, like you said, like despite how great they've been in the regular season, a lot of people are doubting them. And it could just be a scenario where they just kind of stomp their way through everybody. Not saying they will, but like it could be one of those scenarios where, again, everything just clicks, everything works, and then before you know it, boom, right? They're in the finals with a real chance to win it all. Because I do think they can match up well with either Cleveland or Boston. Which one do you think they match up better against? They did sweep the Celtics in the regular season matchup. I think I don't. I think in the first matchup, I think all the Celtics guys played, but I'm pretty sure Chet was out. And then the second one, Porzingis was out, J-Dub was out. But then for Cleveland, right, I think those games, if I'm not mistaken, were post DeAndre Hunter or pre
Yeah,
DeAndre
pre-Hunt.
Hunter,
Yeah,
right? But either way, which team do you think they match up better against?
Celtics for sure.
Mhm.
I think Shea's ability to keep people off balance nightly, it's going to be a tough
Mhm.
cover for two of the top defenders in the league with Drew Holiday and Derek White. And I think Chet is almost a mirror match to to um to Porzingis, and I think Hartenstein provides that mentality that Al Horford does as well. Hustle, and we already know what he can do with the ball in his hands, play, make, pass, all that stuff. But arguably, Oklahoma City's just as deep as Boston. You look at their guys on the bench, who can cook up as well. Like Kassan Wallace is underrated, I think, in this league. You got Caruso, Isaiah Joe. Need I go on? Really? I mean, like they got shooters on that team. You got Lou Dort as well defensively. So you have the personnel defensively, I think, to match up against what Boston can put out offensively. And if Boston continues to not look as potent and dominant as they did last year, then yeah, I would for sure be like, yeah, let's attack that team because we're simply better than them this season. I think Cleveland would be the one that scares you a little bit more because they're so, potent on offense. They're able to catch fire. And I think if they're hitting their threes, there's no stopping Cleveland at all. Similar story to Boston, but I think Cleveland's is a little bit more potent.
Right. Yeah. Just because I think they have depth too, and then they obviously have the two bigs factor, which Boston can do that as well, but it's a
Mm-hmm.
little bit different,
Yep.
right? I think just with the way that they play, but we'll see. Because I think of all these teams, like OKC, we were really high on going into the season, anyways, right?
Yep.
Because like you said, that was our pick to make the finals in the West. Right, Cleveland was, I think, the one we were quote unquote lowest on, but we at least thought that they would be real. That we at least thought they'd be good.
We
I
thought they would
don't.
be
I
better
think. Yeah, I think we thought they'd be better,
because of the
but
coaching
did we?
change too.
Yeah, we thought they'd be better because we thought bounce back Garland season,
Yep.
improved Evan Mobley,
Yep.
right, and new coach.
Yep.
But I don't think we expected them to look better than the
No.
Celtics have, right? And that's where I think that's the part that I think was more surprising is how dominant they've been this season. We expected them to be better, but not necessarily dominant, right?
Yep.
We expected them to maybe look closer to Boston, but still not good enough. But they've
Mm-hmm.
been better than Boston this year. I mean, both in terms of the record and just how they've played, like when you watch them play. But I don't know. Like again, with the Celtics, a strong stretch of a bounce back stretch, of 3-point shooting and some improved play from Jaylen Brown and Drew Holiday and others could fix that. But right now, the Celtics were my pick to win it all. But I don't feel as strong. I don't feel as good about it now, right? Like right now, it feels like of those three, they feel like number three.
I agree. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah, but and again, it's gonna be funny as we get deeper into the playoffs. But just a couple of stories. I guess before we get out of here,
Mm-hmm.
you did have the NBA in looking into games missed by Maxey and Paul George due to injuries. They're also looking into the Thunder, right, where they had that one game where they sat 5 starters. I know the NBA has tried to crack down more on this. I think they did. What did they do? They fined Utah, right, for one of those games where they sat Lauri Markkanen. Does it really mean much, outside of fines? Probably not, but just kind of a funny thing.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of interesting. And I think my thing would be, well, if you're not healthy and you're not playing, from a fan perspective, that would get me freaking pissed. If I pay money to see you and you're not playing, but you
Mhm.
are healthy, what are we doing here? You know what I mean? But outside of that, I really don't care.
Yeah. Then a funny Nick story from the New York Post where Mikal Bridges, he asked Tibbs to back off a bit in terms of playing him fewer minutes to show more love, to the bench. This is a real story. This is not like
Well, I
a
didn't hear
phony
this
story.
one.
It's the guy Stefan Bonnie who covers the Knicks for the New York Post, and they asked him about some of this stuff, and he said sometimes it's not fun on the body. You'll want that as a coach. But also talk to him a little bit, knowing that we've got a good enough team where our bench guys can come in and we don't need to play 48 minutes, 47 minutes. Because we talked about this, where down the stretch of the season, you don't want that because then you don't have a scenario where, I guess, kind of a freak injury, but Jalen Brunson, he's out, right? Where he's probably not coming back for a while now, and that's your best player. You cannot, you can't afford to lose that guy,
Yeah.
for a long stretch because, that could be, if let's say he comes back and he's hobbled to begin the postseason, you might be in a little bit more trouble than, you would have been where you probably would have been able to cruise the rest of the way of the regular season, maybe just sit some guys and then, do whatever you want to close it out. But, again, it's not crazy depth, right? But it's just in the regular season, you shouldn't have to play those guys the minutes that they play. But, that's the roster they put together going into the season. So.
Yeah, and I've always kind of questioned that looking at the Knicks. Well, why isn't
Mhm.
such and such playing? Like Kolek, I feel like he could have maybe had some minutes or something here and there. I mean, granted, you do have Campaign, you do have other guys as well that can, fill in that position at times. But, I agree. And I think last year in the playoffs was proof of concept because you played those guys a lot throughout the whole regular season. You did the same thing in the postseason, then they ran out of gas. The wheels freaking fell off, and it was bad. So, you applaud them for what they did last year in terms of their run, but it could only go so far if you're, maxing these guys out on a nightly basis throughout the entire season, not just the postseason. So I agree.
Yeah. Right. Then we also had a story where it seems like the Mavs may have to forfeit some games potentially because of the fact that they're continuing to be down more and more players. Like, they already lost Kyrie, right? They may not play AD the rest of the way. And then a couple of their young guys, like Jaden Hardy and I think, what is it, Maxence Prosper, they're both out. Then I think they just recently lost for a while Dante Exum, right?
Yeah.
So they're running out of players now to the point where, again, pretty much everything that could go wrong has gone wrong for the Mavs. Where like now they're in a point where forget playoffs, probably forget play-in, or even if you get in there, you have no shot. And then even next season, you're going to be in trouble because, you're not going to have Kyrie for a stretch. And unless they make some crazy trade, maybe it happens. Now it looks even worse where the window may just be closed.
Yeah, it's crazy. And you think, well, it can't get much worse. Well, you do kind of at this point, if you're a Mavs fan, probably want to start losing games, but to forfeit them, I think would probably be the absolute most embarrassing outcome for sure. And it just reflects poorly on the whole organization.
Right. Yeah. It's tough, but yeah. But that pretty much concludes our episode of Off Ball Takes. We don't have any comments to read, but on our last IG post, we did put up a poll about should OKC be the new favorites over Boston to win it all, right? And we got 9 responses. 67% of those said yes, right? So, so pretty much 6 of you said yes, 3 of you said no. So it seems like, most of the people who looked at our content, right, pretty much said, yeah, we think that they might be the new favorites to win it all. Well, again, we'll have to see there. But again, OKC has continued to impress as they continue to, check all of the boxes in terms of what we've seen over the course of the regular season, especially with SGA playing the way he's been playing, right? He just had 47 against Detroit.
Yeah, exactly. It only makes sense, that they're the favorite.
Yeah. Well, again, that pretty much concludes our episode of Off Ball Takes. Let us know your thoughts in the comments about, all these crazy potential matchups. Let us know your thoughts on, OKC, right, in the Cavs, and, whether or not you feel like they should be taken seriously. Let us know your thoughts on the Wolves, right? Could they possibly make a run? Maybe the Knicks, do you feel different about them in terms of the defense? Let us know. And again, continue to leave comments on our videos or on our socials. If you leave a comment, we will try to read it at the end of the video. Obviously, join the polls if you want as well. So that way we can kind of gauge some things and continue to like and subscribe to our videos and content to help our channel grow. We appreciate it all. We'll see you next episode.